The September wind cut across the Montana plains like a blade, carrying with it the scent of dying grass and the promise of an early winter. Sarah McKenna pulled her wool shawl tighter around her shoulders as she made her way down to the creek, the wooden bucket bumping against her leg with each step. 8 months had passed since Thomas died, and still she found herself listening for his voice calling her name across the homestead. The creek ran low this time of year, barely more than a trickle between the moss-covered stones. She knelt carefully on the bank, her black mourning dress pooling around her in the damp earth. As she dipped the bucket into the shallow water, something upstream caught her eye, a splash of color that didn't belong among the browns and golds of autumn. Rising slowly, Sarah shaded her eyes against the late afternoon sun. There, perhaps 50 yards upstream, a figure lay motionless beside a fallen cottonwood, her heart hammered against her ribs. Indians had been seen in the area recently, and the memory of other homesteads burned to ash was still fresh in everyone's minds. She should return to the cabin immediately, should grab Thomas's rifle and barricade herself inside until whoever it was either moved on or didn't. But something about the stillness of the figure made her hesitate. No threat moved that little. Against every instinct screaming at her to flee, Sarah crept closer, her boots silent on the soft earth. As the distance closed, details emerged that made her breath catch. A man, a Lakota warrior by his dress, lay on his side, his long black hair spread across the ground like spilled ink. Blood darkened the beadwork on his buckskin shirt, and his breathing came in shallow, labored gasps. The shaft of an arrow protruded from his left side, just below his ribs. But it was broken, snapped off perhaps 6 inches from where it entered his body. The fletching lay scattered nearby, the careful craftsmanship destroyed. In his right hand, he still clutched another arrow, this one whole but cracked along its length, as if he'd fallen on it. Sarah's first instinct was to back away slowly and pretend she'd never seen him. Let nature take its course. After all, hadn't his people taken enough from her already? Thomas might still be alive if they'd settled somewhere safer, somewhere civilization had already pushed back the wilderness. But as she watched, the warrior's eyes fluttered open. Dark as midnight and glazed with pain, they found hers and held. No hatred blazed there, no savage fury, only the look of a creature that knew death was close and had accepted it. "Water," he whispered in heavily accented English, the word barely audible. Sarah's hand moved instinctively toward the bucket she'd dropped. She caught herself, pulled back. This was madness. If anyone discovered she'd helped him, the warrior's eyes closed again, and his breathing grew shallower. The arrow in his hand, she could see now it was beautifully made, with intricate carvings along the shaft and real craftsmanship in the point. A hunting arrow, not a war arrow, and it was broken, just like the man who held it. Something in that image, the careful artistry destroyed, the helplessness, the quiet dignity with which he faced death, cracked something inside her chest. Before she could think better of it, Sarah was kneeling beside him, lifting his head to pour water between his cracked lips. His eyes opened again, wider this time, studying her face with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. She'd expected suspicion, maybe fear. Instead, she saw something like wonder. "You... help me." His English was broken but understandable. Sarah didn't answer immediately. She was looking at the wound, assessing what she could see. The arrow had gone in at an angle, likely while he was riding or falling from a horse. The bleeding had mostly stopped, which was good, but the shaft needed to come out soon or infection would kill him anyway. "Can you walk?" she asked finally. He tried to push himself up, managed to get to one elbow before collapsing back with a strangled gasp. "No." Sarah looked back toward her cabin, then at the western horizon where the sun hung low. If she was going to do this foolish thing, it had to be now, before dark brought the cold and made his chances even worse. "I'm going to help you to my cabin," she said, the words sounding strange in her own ears. "But if you try anything at all, I'll put a bullet in you myself." The ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I cannot try much of anything." Despite everything, despite the danger and the insanity of what she was doing, Sarah almost smiled back. Almost. Instead, she worked her arms under his shoulders, bracing herself to take most of his weight. He was lighter than Thomas had been, but all lean muscle and bone. As they struggled to their feet together, she caught the scent of him. Leather and smoke and something wild, like pine needles and open sky. The journey to the cabin took nearly an hour, with frequent stops to rest. By the time they reached her door, both were exhausted, and the warrior, Mahpiya, he'd told her his name was, had lost consciousness twice. Sarah managed to get him onto the bed in the small back room where she stored supplies, then stood looking down at him, wondering what in God's name she'd just done. Outside, the wind was picking up, rattling the windows and promising a cold night ahead. Sarah built up the fire, heated water, and gathered her sewing supplies. The arrow would have to come out, the wound cleaned and stitched. As she worked by lamplight, cutting away his bloodied shirt to expose the wound, Mahpiya drifted in and out of consciousness. Sometimes he spoke in his own language, words that sounded like music and wind. Once he gripped her wrist with surprising strength when she probed too deeply near the arrowhead. "Sorry," she murmured, and meant it. Hours later, with the arrow removed and the wound cleaned and bound, Sarah finally allowed herself to sit back. Mahpiya's breathing was deeper now, more regular. The fever hadn't set in yet, which was good. He might actually survive. Only then did she notice the broken arrow still clutched in his right hand. She tried to pry it loose, but even unconscious, his grip was firm. Instead, she examined it more closely. The crack ran the full length of the shaft, but it was clean, it could be repaired. The carved symbols along its length were beautiful, telling some story she couldn't read. Without really thinking about it, Sarah found herself in Thomas's old workshop, searching through his tools until she found what she needed. Working by candlelight, she carefully applied thin strips of sinew along the crack, binding them tight and letting the natural adhesive set. It was delicate work, requiring patience and steady hands. When she was finished, the arrow was whole again. Different than before, the repair lines were visible, but strong, maybe even stronger than it had been originally. She returned to find Mahpiya awake, watching her with those dark eyes. "You fixed it," he said softly. Looking at the arrow she placed beside him on the bed. "It seemed important to you." He studied her face in the lamplight. "You are not what I expected from a white woman." "What did you expect? Fear, hatred, screaming." His voice was getting stronger. "Not kindness." Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Don't mistake practicality for kindness. A dead man on my property would bring questions I don't want to answer." But even as she said it, they both knew it wasn't true. She could have left him by the creek, could have done a dozen things that didn't involve risking her own safety. Mahpiya nodded slowly, accepting her words even if he didn't believe them. "What is your name?" "Sarah. Sarah McKenna." "Sarah," he repeated, the name sounding different in his accent. "You are alone here?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications. Sarah's hand moved instinctively to the rifle leaning against the wall. "My husband died," she said finally, "but I'm not helpless." "I did not think you were helpless," Mahpiya said quietly. "A helpless woman would not have saved my life." Outside, something howled in the distance. A coyote, probably, or maybe a wolf. Sarah shivered and added another log to the fire. When she turned back, Mahpiya was asleep again, the repaired arrow cradled against his chest like a talisman. She settled into the chair beside the bed, Thomas's rifle across her knees, and prepared for a long night of watching. Tomorrow, she would figure out what to do next. Tomorrow she would face the consequences of her choice. But tonight, for the first time in 8 months, she wasn't alone. Sarah woke with a start, her neck stiff from sleeping in the chair. Dawn light filtered through the cabin windows, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. The fire had burned low during the night, and the room carried a morning chill that made her pull her shawl closer. Mahpiya was awake, watching her with those steady dark eyes. In the daylight, she could see him more clearly. The strong line of his jaw, the way his black hair fell across his shoulders, the intelligence that sparked behind his gaze despite the pain he must be feeling. "You stayed," he said, his voice stronger than it had been the night before. "I had to make sure you didn't die in my bed," Sarah replied, rising to stoke the fire. Would have been hard to explain, but her hands trembled slightly as she added kindling, and they both knew her vigil had been about more than just avoiding inconvenient questions. "How do you feel?" she asked, not looking at him. "Like I was trampled by buffalo." He tried to shift position and winced. "But alive, thanks to you." Sarah busied herself preparing breakfast, cornbread and coffee, nothing fancy. She could feel him watching her move around the small space, and it made her self-conscious in a way she hadn't felt since she was a young woman courting Thomas. "You should eat," she said, approaching the bed with a plate. "Need to keep your strength up." Mahpiya struggled to sit upright, his face pale with the effort. Without thinking, Sarah reached out to help him, her hands supporting his shoulders as he levered himself against the headboard. The contact sent an unexpected warmth through her, and she pulled away quickly once he was settled. "Thank you," he said quietly. They ate in relative silence, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the wind whistling around the cabin eaves. Sarah found herself stealing glances at him when she thought he wasn't looking, noting the careful way he moved, the proud set of his shoulders even when injured. "The arrow," Mahpiya said finally, touching the repaired shaft that lay beside him. "I did this in the night," Sarah nodded. "It was broken, seemed ashamed to leave it that way. Do you know what this is?" He lifted the arrow carefully, running his fingers over the carved symbols. "A hunting arrow?" "Yes, but more." His eyes found hers. "This was my grandfather's, his grandfather's before that, passed down through 5 generations of my family. The markings tell the story of our people, our victories, our losses." He paused. "I thought it was lost forever when it broke." Sarah felt heat creep up her neck. "I didn't know, it looked important." "It is. And now," he examined the sinew bindings, the careful way she'd aligned the pieces. "Now it carries your touch as well as theirs. In my people's way of thinking, this makes it more powerful, not less." "I don't understand." Mahpiya set the arrow aside and studied her face. "You took something broken and made it whole. That is medicine, healing, the strongest kind of power there is." Something in his tone made Sarah's pulse quicken. She stood abruptly, gathering the empty plates. "I should check your wound, make sure there's no infection." He nodded and, with some difficulty, pulled off what remained of his shirt. In the morning light, Sarah could see the full extent of the injury. A puckered hole just below his ribs, surrounded by bruising that painted his side in shades of purple and yellow. Her stitches were holding well, and there was no sign of the red streaking that would indicate blood poisoning. "It's healing cleanly," she said, rewrapping the wound with fresh bandages. Her fingers brushed his skin as she worked, and she tried to ignore the way he drew in a sharp breath at the contact. "You were lucky. Few inches higher, and it would have hit something vital." "Not luck," Mahpiya said. "The spirits were watching over me, led me to the one person who would help instead of—" He didn't finish the sentence. "Instead of what most white settlers would do," Sarah finished for him. "Yes." She secured the bandage and stepped back. "Why were you alone? Where's the rest of your people?" Mahpiya's expression grew distant. "Hunting party. We separated to cover more ground. Winter comes early this year, and the buffalo herds are thin. I was tracking an elk when the soldiers found me." "Soldiers? Cavalry patrol. They shot first, asked questions after." His hand moved unconsciously to his wound. "I managed to get away, but my horse was hit too. Had to leave him behind." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. "How many soldiers?" 6, maybe 7. They were heading west when I last saw them, toward town, toward people who would ask Sarah McKenna why she'd been seen with an Indian, if anyone had noticed Mahpiya's presence. The thought made her stomach clench with fear. "They'll be looking for you," she said. "Yes. And when they don't find a body—" Mahpiya met her gaze. "I should go today. I've put you in enough danger already. You can barely sit up without help. How do you expect to travel?" "I will manage." "Like hell you will." The words came out sharper than she'd intended. "You'll get maybe a mile before you collapse, and then where will you be? Dead in a ditch somewhere, and me left wondering if I could have done more." Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, maybe, or something warmer. "I care what happens to me." It wasn't a question, and Sarah found she couldn't deny it. "I don't make a habit of letting people die if I can help it." "Even Indians?" The question hung between them, heavy with the weight of everything unsaid. Sarah thought of Thomas, of the fever that had taken him while she'd been powerless to help, of the long months of loneliness that had followed, of the way this stranger's presence had somehow made her feel more alive than she had in almost a year. "Even Indians," she said finally. Mahpiya smiled then, a real smile that transformed his entire face. "You are a puzzle, Sarah McKenna. I'm a practical woman trying to keep you from getting us both killed." But she found herself almost smiling back. The rest of the morning passed quietly. Sarah tended to her chores while Mahpiya dozed, but she found herself checking on him frequently. Each time she'd catch him watching her with those dark, thoughtful eyes, and each time she'd feel that strange flutter in her chest. It was just past noon when he spoke again. "Sarah," she looked up from her mending. "What?" "In my language, your name would be Petanya tu Winyan." "What does that mean?" "Autumn woman, for the color of your hair, like the leaves when they turn." He paused. "And for the way you found me when everything seemed lost." The compliment caught her off guard, made her fumble with her needle. That's nice." "Nice," he repeated, as if testing the word. "Yes, you are nice, Tanyetu Winyan." The way he said it, her name in his language, sent warmth spreading through her chest. It was foolish, she told herself, dangerous. She was a white woman harboring an Indian in her home, and if anyone found out... But when Mahpiya looked at her like that, with something that might have been admiration, maybe even affection, it was hard to remember why any of that mattered. "You should rest," she said, focusing determinedly on her sewing. "Build up your strength. And you should tell me about your husband." Sarah's hands stilled. "Why?" "Because you speak of him in the past, but you still wear his shadow like a second skin. Because understanding your grief will help me understand you." The observation was so perceptive it made her chest tight. He was a good man, gentle. He wanted to build something here, something lasting. But he wasn't made for this country. Too trusting, too optimistic. He thought everyone could get along if they just tried hard enough. Sarah's voice grew soft. "The fever took him last winter. I tried everything I knew, but it wasn't enough. You blame yourself. I blame myself for not being able to save him. Just like I'd blame myself if you died because I was too scared to help." Mahpiya was quiet for a long moment. "Your husband sounds like a man of honor." "He was. Then he would understand what you're doing now, would be proud of your courage." Sarah felt tears prick the corners of her eyes. "You don't know that. I know that a man who loved you enough to bring you to this wild place would want you to follow your heart, even when it leads somewhere unexpected." The words hung in the air between them, loaded with meaning neither was quite ready to acknowledge. Sarah set aside her mending and stood, suddenly needing distance. "I should check the horses," she said. "Make sure everything looks normal if anyone comes by." But as she reached the door, Mahpiya's voice stopped her. "Sarah." When she turned back, he was holding the repaired arrow, studying the places where her work had made it whole again. "Thank you for everything." The simple words carried such weight, such genuine gratitude, that Sarah felt her defenses crack a little more. "Get some rest," she said, and fled outside before she could say something she'd regret. But even as she went through the motions of her daily routine, her thoughts kept returning to the man in her cabin, to the way he'd looked at her when he called her Autumn Woman, to the growing certainty that whatever was happening between them was far more dangerous than any cavalry patrol, and far more precious than she'd ever expected to find again. 3 days passed in a strange rhythm that Sarah had never experienced before. She would wake before dawn to tend the animals and check the horizon for any sign of riders, then return to find Mahpiya awake and watching for her through the window. They would share breakfast mostly in silence, though she began to notice the way his eyes followed her movements around the cabin, and the way her own pulse quickened when their hands accidentally touched as she changed his bandages. On the 4th morning, she found him attempting to stand by the window, one hand braced against the wall for support. "What do you think you're doing?" Sarah rushed to his side, slipping her arm around his waist to steady him. "Looking for my people," he said, though he made no effort to pull away from her touch. "They will be searching for me by now. And what if the soldiers find you first? Then I die standing, not lying in bed like an invalid." Sarah felt frustration flare in her chest. "You stubborn—" She caught herself before finishing the insult. "You're not an invalid. You're healing. There's a difference." "Is there?" His dark eyes searched her face. "Or am I just a burden you've taken on out of misplaced kindness?" The question stung because it forced her to confront something she'd been avoiding. "If you were a burden, I would have left you by the creek." "Then why am I here, Sarah?" "Really?" She opened her mouth to give him the practical answer, the same one she'd been giving herself for days, that she couldn't let a man die when she had the power to save him, that it was simple Christian charity, that it meant nothing more than basic human decency. But with his body warm against hers and his eyes holding hers with such intensity, the words wouldn't come. "I don't know," she whispered, and the honesty of it shocked them both. Mahpiya raised his free hand to touch her face, his fingers tracing the line of her cheek with surprising gentleness. "I think you do know. You're just afraid to say it." Sarah's breath caught. She should step away, should put distance between them before this went somewhere they couldn't come back from. Instead, she found herself leaning into his touch. "This is madness," she said. "Yes," he agreed, "but perhaps the best kind of madness." For a moment, they stood frozen in that tableau, her supporting his weight, his hand cupping her face, both of them balanced on the edge of something that would change everything. Then the sound of hoofbeats in the distance shattered the spell. Sarah jerked away from him, her heart hammering. "Get back to bed now." Mahpiya didn't argue. He could hear what she heard. Multiple horses approaching at a steady pace. Not the desperate gallop of someone in distress, but the measured rhythm of men with purpose. Sarah helped him back to the bed, then grabbed Thomas's rifle from where it leaned against the wall. "Stay quiet. Don't make a sound unless I call for you." She barely had time to smooth her hair and check her appearance before the knock came, firm, authoritative, the kind of knock that expected to be answered immediately. Sarah opened the door to find 3 men on her porch. 2 wore the blue uniforms of the cavalry, while the third was dressed in the rough clothes of a civilian scout. All 3 had the hard, weathered look of men who'd spent too much time in the saddle, chasing shadows across hostile territory. "Mrs. McKenna," the sergeant stepped forward, touching the brim of his hat. "Sergeant Collins, U.S. Cavalry. This is Corporal Hayes and our scout, Jim Bridger." Sarah recognized the name. Bridger was famous throughout the territory as an Indian fighter and tracker. Her mouth went dry, but she managed to keep her voice steady. "Gentlemen, what can I do for you? We're tracking a wounded Indian, Lakota warrior who escaped after we engaged his party 4 days ago. We have reason to believe he might have come this way." "I haven't seen any Indians," Sarah said, which was technically true. She'd seen 1 Indian, but not any. Bridger stepped forward, his pale eyes scanning the area around her cabin. "Mind if we take a look around? Wounded man leaves a trail and this one's been bleeding steady." "I mind very much," Sarah said, lifting her chin. "This is my property, and I don't appreciate the implication that I'd harbor a hostile." "No implication intended, ma'am," Sergeant Collins said smoothly. "But this particular Indian killed 2 of our men before he got away. We can't let him slip through our fingers." Sarah's stomach clenched. Mahpiya hadn't mentioned killing anyone, but then again he'd been half delirious with pain and fever. Had she been harboring a murderer? "I understand your concern," she said carefully. "But as I told you, I haven't seen anyone. I think I'd notice a wounded Indian on my property." Bridger was studying the ground near her porch, his experienced eyes reading signs invisible to others. "Someone's been moving around here recently. Heavy footsteps, uneven gait, like a man favoring one side." Sarah's heart nearly stopped, but she forced herself to remain calm. "That would be me. I sprained my ankle a few days ago fetching water from the creek, still favoring it some." The scout looked up at her, suspicion clear in his expression. "Ma'am, I've been tracking men and animals across this territory for 30 years. I know the difference between a woman's footprint and a man's." "Are you calling me a liar, Mr. Bridger?" The direct challenge seemed to catch him off guard. "I'm saying the signs don't match your story." "Then perhaps you're not as good a tracker as your reputation suggests." Silence stretched between them, tense and dangerous. Sarah could feel sweat beading on her forehead despite the cool morning air. Behind the cabin door, she prayed Mahpiya had the sense to stay absolutely still. Finally, Sergeant Collins stepped between her and Bridger. "Mrs. McKenna, I'm going to have to ask you to step aside. We need to search your cabin. You need a warrant for that." "Out here, ma'am, my authority is all the warrant I need." Sarah gripped the rifle tighter. "This is still America, Sergeant. I have rights. Rights don't mean much when there's a killer on the loose." Collins's voice hardened. "Now step aside or I'll have my men move you aside." For a moment Sarah considered fighting. The rifle in her hands was loaded, and she was a fair shot. But 3 armed men against 1 woman, it would be suicide, and it wouldn't save Mahpiya anyway. Slowly she stepped back from the doorway. The soldiers moved past her into the cabin, their boots loud on the wooden floor. Sarah followed, her mouth dry with fear, watching as they checked every corner, every possible hiding place. "Bedroom's back here," Hayes called from the rear of the cabin. Sarah's heart stopped. She'd forgotten. Mahpiya's bloodied shirt was still in there, along with the basin she'd used to clean his wounds, evidence that would damn them both. But when the soldiers emerged from the back room, their expressions were frustrated rather than triumphant. "Nothing, Sergeant," Hayes reported. "Bed's been slept in, but that's to be expected." Bridger was examining the floor near the fireplace, frowning. "There's something not right here. I can feel it in my bones." "Your bones don't constitute evidence," Collins said curtly. "Mrs. McKenna, we apologize for the intrusion. If you see anything suspicious, anything at all, you send word to the fort immediately." "Of course," Sarah managed. They filed out of her cabin, but Bridger paused at the door, looking back at her with those pale, calculating eyes. "Ma'am, I hope for your sake you're telling the truth. Helping an Indian, especially one who's killed soldiers, that's a hanging offense." Sarah met his gaze steadily. "I'm well aware of the law, Mr. Bridger." After they left, Sarah waited until the sound of hoofbeats faded completely before allowing herself to breathe properly. Then she hurried to the back room, expecting to find Mahpiya in bed. Instead, she found him crouched in the narrow space between the wall and her storage chest, pale and shaking from the effort of staying hidden. The chest itself had been moved slightly, just enough to create a hiding space that would escape casual notice. "How did you—" "Heard them coming before you did," he said, accepting her help to stand. "Had time to hide the evidence and find a better place to wait." Sarah looked around the room. Her water basin was gone, along with his torn shirt and the bloodied bandages. "Where?" "Under the floorboards beneath the chest. I'll retrieve them later." He swayed slightly, and she steadied him, the one with pale eyes. He knew something was wrong. "Bridger. He's famous for being able to track anything. He will be back." Sarah helped him to the bed, her mind racing. "Then we need to get you out of here. Tonight, when it's dark." "I can't travel yet. Won't make it a mile." "You'll make it farther than you will if they catch you here." She met his gaze. "They said you killed 2 soldiers." Mahpiya's expression grew grim. "They attacked first. I defended myself." "But you did kill them." "Yes." No shame in his voice, no apology. "They would have killed me otherwise. Would you rather I had let them?" Sarah realized she wouldn't. The thought of Mahpiya dead, never having met him, never having felt whatever was growing between them, it was unbearable. "No," she said quietly, "I wouldn't." Something in her voice made him look at her more closely. "You're not afraid of me, even knowing what I've done. Should I be?" "Most white women would be." Sarah thought about that. "I'm not most white women." "No," Mahpiya agreed, reaching out to take her hand. "You are not." The touch sent warmth shooting up her arm, and suddenly the danger they were in faded compared to the danger of what she was feeling. This attraction, this connection, it was more than just gratitude or loneliness. It was something deeper, something that threatened to upend everything she thought she knew about herself. "Mahpiya," she began, then stopped, not sure what she wanted to say. "I know," he said softly. "I feel it too." They were interrupted by the sound of horses returning. Sarah flew to the window, peering through the curtains to see Bridger approaching alone, moving slowly, his eyes fixed on the ground. "He's back," she whispered. "Just Bridger." Mahpiya was already moving toward his hiding place, but Sarah caught his arm. "Wait." She looked into his dark eyes, seeing her own fear reflected there. When they asked about you, I could have told them the truth, could have saved myself a lot of trouble." "Why didn't you?" Sarah took a shaky breath. "Because somewhere in the last 4 days, I stopped seeing you as an Indian and started seeing you as Mahpiya, as the man who calls me Autumn Woman and looks at me like I'm something precious." His hand tightened on hers. "Sarah, I'm falling in love with you," she said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "God help me, but I think I'm falling in love with you." Mahpiya's eyes widened, and for a moment he looked as stunned as she felt. Then he was pulling her closer, his lips finding hers in a kiss that was desperate and tender and full of everything they couldn't say. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. "Petanyetu Winyan," he whispered against her forehead. "My Autumn Woman. I have been falling in love with you since the moment you chose to save my life, instead of walking away." The sound of Bridger's boots on the porch steps broke the spell. Sarah helped Mahpiya into his hiding place, then went to face whatever new threat awaited them, her lips still burning from his kiss, and her heart full of a love that could get them both killed. Sarah opened the door before Bridger could knock, her chin raised in defiance, despite the fear coursing through her veins. The scout sat astride his horse, studying her with those unsettling pale eyes that seemed to see straight through to her secrets. "Mrs. McKenna," he said, touching his hat brim. "Forgot to mention something earlier." "Oh?" Sarah kept her voice carefully neutral. Bridger dismounted slowly, his gaze never leaving her face. "That Indian we're tracking. He's not just any warrior. Name's Mahpiya, means cloud in their tongue. He's the son of Chief Red Thunder, one of the most respected war leaders among the Lakota." Sarah's blood turned to ice, but she managed to keep her expression blank. "I'm not sure why you're telling me this. Because if he dies out here, it won't just be the loss of one man, it'll mean war. Red Thunder's already been talking to the other chiefs about uniting against the white settlements. His son's death would give him all the justification he needs." The scout stepped closer, and Sarah caught the scent of tobacco and leather, the smell of a man who'd spent his life outdoors. On the other hand, if Mahpiya were to return to his people alive, well, that might be the kind of thing that could prevent a lot of bloodshed. Sarah's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. "What exactly are you suggesting, Mr. Bridger?" "I'm suggesting that sometimes the greater good requires a man to look the other way, to maybe let his tracking skills fail him just this once." His eyes bored into hers. but only if he could be sure that such mercy wouldn't be misplaced. The implication hung heavy in the air between them. He knew. Somehow, despite all their precautions, Jim Bridger knew exactly where Mahpiya was. "I don't know what you think you know," Sarah said carefully. "I know that a wounded man leaves more than just footprints, ma'am. I know the smell of blood and medicine and fear. I know when someone's been tending wounds in the middle of the night." He paused. "And I know a woman in love when I see one." Heat flooded Sarah's cheeks. "You're mistaken." "Am I?" Bridger moved closer to the porch. "Mrs. McKenna, I've been fighting Indians for most of my adult life. I've seen what they can do when they're angry, and I've seen what they can do when they're grateful. Right now, we're balanced on a knife's edge between those two possibilities." Sarah gripped the doorframe, her knuckles white. "What do you want from me?" "I want you to understand the stakes. If Mahpiya dies, hundreds of people, maybe thousands, will follow him into the ground. Men, women, children on both sides of this conflict." His voice dropped. "But if he lives, if he goes back to his father with stories about a white woman who showed him kindness instead of hatred, you think one act of mercy could prevent a war?" "I think one act of mercy already has, ma'am. The question is whether you're brave enough to see it through." Before Sarah could respond, Bridger remounted his horse. "I'll be filing my report tonight. Gonna say the trail went cold at Willow Creek, about 5 miles east of here. Gonna recommend we call off the search and focus our efforts elsewhere." He turned his horse to leave, then paused. "Mrs. McKenna? If I were harboring someone, hypothetically speaking, I'd make sure they were strong enough to travel within the next day or two, and I'd send word to their people about where to find them, hypothetically." With that, he rode away, leaving Sarah standing on her porch with her mouth open and her mind reeling. She waited until he was completely out of sight before hurrying back inside. Mahpiya emerged from his hiding place the moment she entered the back room, his face tense with concern. What did he want? Sarah sank into the chair beside the bed, suddenly exhausted. "To tell me that you're Chief Red Thunder's son, and that your death could start a war." Mahpiya's expression grew grim. "He's not wrong. My father has been gathering the tribes, trying to convince them to stand together against the encroachment of white settlers. My death would be the spark he needs to unite them in warfare. Why didn't you tell me who you were? Would it have changed anything? Would you have helped me if you'd known I was the son of a chief?" Sarah considered this. "I don't know. Maybe it would have made me more afraid. Maybe it would have made me send you away. Then I'm glad you didn't know." Mahpiya reached for her hand. "But now that you do." "Now I'm terrified," Sarah admitted. "Not of you, but of what this means. If anyone finds out what we feel for each other, they will call you a traitor, an Indian lover." His thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. "They will say you've betrayed your own kind. And what will your people say? About their chief's son who fell in love with a white woman?" Mahpiya was quiet for a long moment. "Some will understand. Others—" He shook his head. "Love does not recognize the boundaries that men draw on maps, Sarah. But people do. And they will make us pay for crossing those boundaries." Sarah pulled her hand free and stood, pacing to the window. Outside, the afternoon sun painted the landscape in gold and amber, the same colors Mahpiya had compared to her hair. Everything looked so peaceful, so normal. It was hard to believe that their world was balanced on the edge of a knife. "Bridger said I should send word to your people. Tell them where to find you." "And will you?" Sarah turned to face him. "Do you want me to?" "I want—" Mahpiya struggled to sit up straighter. "I want to take you with me. I want to bring you to my people and make you my wife according to our customs. I want to wake up beside you every morning and know that you chose me despite everything that stands against us." The raw honesty in his voice made Sarah's chest tight. "And I want that too. More than I've ever wanted anything. But wanting something and being able to have it are two different things." "Are they? Sarah, what if there was a way? What if you could come with me, not as a captive or a curiosity, but as an honored guest? What if my father could see you as I see you, as a woman of courage and compassion who chose love over fear? Your father would never accept me. He might, if he understood what you've done, if he saw how you've changed me." Mahpiya's eyes blazed with sudden intensity. "Sarah, before I met you, I saw all white people as enemies. I believed there could never be peace between our peoples, because I thought there could never be understanding. But you've shown me that I was wrong." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. "One person doesn't change centuries of conflict. One person can change everything. Look at us. A week ago we were supposed to be enemies. Now look what we've become." He was right, and Sarah knew it. But knowing it and believing they could make it work were two different things. Even if your father accepted me, she said slowly, I'd be giving up everything. My home, my life, my entire world. And I would be honored to share my world with you. My people, my customs, my future. Mahpiya held out his hand to her. But I won't ask you to make that choice unless you're certain, unless you believe that what we have is worth the risk. Sarah stared at his outstretched hand, knowing that taking it would change everything. There would be no going back, no pretending that she was just a widow living quietly on her homestead. She would be Sarah McKenna, the white woman who fell in love with a Lakota chief's son, the woman who chose love over safety, passion over convention. Slowly, she reached out and took his hand. I'm certain, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Terrified, but certain. Mahpiya pulled her down to sit beside him on the bed, his free hand cupping her face. Then we'll find a way. Together. He kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise. When they broke apart, Sarah rested her forehead against his, breathing in the scent of him, memorizing the feel of his skin against hers. What do we do now? She asked. Now we prepare. I need to be strong enough to travel, and you need to decide what you want to take with you, what you can't bear to leave behind. Sarah looked around the cabin, at Thomas's tools hanging on the wall, at the quilt her mother had made, at all the remnants of the life she'd built with her first husband. Strange how none of it seemed as important as it had just a week ago. There's not much, she said. Most of what matters to me now is sitting right here. Mahpiya smiled, the expression transforming his entire face. Then we travel light. As if summoned by their decision, the sound of horses approaching drifted through the window. But this time there were many horses, more than a cavalry patrol, more than Sarah had ever heard approaching her homestead at once. She moved to the window and peered out, her heart stopping at what she saw. At least 20 Lakota warriors sat mounted in a semicircle around her cabin, their horses stamping and snorting in the cool air. They were painted for war, their faces stern and unforgiving, weapons ready. At their head rode a man who could only be Chief Red Thunder, older than Mahpiya, but with the same proud bearing, the same intelligent dark eyes. They found me, Mahpiya said quietly from behind her. Your people? Yes. And from the look of them, they're not here for a social visit. Sarah felt her newfound courage wavering. What do we do? Mahpiya struggled to his feet, wincing at the pain but managing to stand straight. We face them together. We tell them the truth about what happened here, about what we've found. He reached for her hand, and we hope that love is stronger than the hatred that divides our peoples. Outside, Chief Red Thunder raised his hand, and one of the warriors called out in Lakota, words Sarah couldn't understand, but whose meaning was clear enough. Come out. Now. Sarah squeezed Mahpiya's hand, drawing strength from his steady presence. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. She only hoped it would be enough. Ready? Mahpiya asked. Sarah took a deep breath, thinking of everything that had brought them to this moment. The broken arrow, the quiet mornings, the growing love that had blossomed against all odds. Ready, she said. Together they walked toward the door, and whatever fate awaited them on the other side. The autumn air bit at Sarah's skin as she stepped onto the porch beside Mahpiya, her hand still clasped in his. 20 pairs of dark eyes fixed on them, some curious, others hostile, all alert and ready for violence. The war paint streaked across their faces, made them look fierce and otherworldly in the late afternoon light. Chief Red Thunder sat motionless on his painted horse, studying the scene before him with the calculating gaze of a man who had led his people through countless battles. He was older than Sarah had expected, perhaps 50 winters, with silver threading through his long black hair and lines of wisdom etched around his eyes. But there was nothing frail about him. He radiated the kind of quiet power that came from absolute authority, earned through decades of warfare and diplomacy. For a long moment, nobody spoke. The only sounds were the soft snorting of horses and the whisper of wind through the dried grass. Sarah could feel the weight of judgment in the air, could sense the warriors' hands resting near their weapons, ready to act at the slightest provocation. Finally, Chief Red Thunder spoke, his voice carrying clearly across the yard. The words were in Lakota, but his tone was sharp with demand. Mahpiya answered in the same language, his voice respectful but firm. Sarah caught her name, Sarah McKenna, and what sounded like explanations, but the rest was incomprehensible to her. She stood straight and still, trying to project a confidence she didn't feel. The exchange continued for several minutes, with other warriors occasionally interjecting questions or comments. Sarah noticed that some of the hostility seemed to be fading from their faces, replaced by something that might have been curiosity, or even surprise. Then Chief Red Thunder's gaze fixed on her directly, and when he spoke again, it was in accented but clear English. "You are the white woman who saved my son's life." It wasn't a question, but Sarah answered anyway. "Yes." "Why?" The simple question carried enormous weight. Sarah knew that her answer could determine not just her fate, but potentially the future relationship between their peoples. She thought of all the things she could say, about Christian duty, about basic human decency, about the practical concerns that had first motivated her. Instead, she told the truth. "Because when I looked at him, I didn't see an enemy. I saw a man who was hurt and needed help." She paused, meeting the chief's steady gaze. "And because somewhere along the way, I fell in love with him." A ripple of reaction went through the assembled warriors, some murmuring in their own language, others shifting in their saddles. But Chief Red Thunder's expression didn't change. "Love," he repeated, as if testing the word. "You speak of love between our peoples as if such a thing were possible." "Isn't it?" Sarah asked. "Your son and I are proof that it is. My son is a warrior, trained from childhood to fight the white man's encroachment on our lands. You are a white woman, member of the race that has taken everything from us, our buffalo, our sacred places, our freedom." Red Thunder's voice hardened. "What you call love, others might call madness." Sarah felt Mahpiya's hand tighten on hers, offering silent support. "Maybe it is madness," she said, "but if so, it's a madness that has taught me more about courage and hope than all my years of sanity ever did." One of the younger warriors said something harsh in Lakota, his tone clearly hostile. Others nodded in agreement, their hands moving closer to their weapons. But Chief Red Thunder raised a hand for silence. "My nephew believes you are a trick," he said to Sarah, "a trap set by the cavalry to lure us into the open. He thinks I should kill you now and take my son home." Sarah's mouth went dry, but she forced herself to meet the chief's gaze steadily. "And what do you think?" "I think," Red Thunder said slowly, "that a woman who was trying to trap us would not have healed my son's wound so carefully, would not have repaired his grandfather's arrow with such skill." He gestured, and one of the warriors handed him something. The arrow Sarah had mended, its repair lines clearly visible in the afternoon light. "You know about the arrow?" "I know that this arrow has been in my family for 5 generations. I know that it was broken when my son fell from his horse fleeing the soldiers' bullets, and I know that only someone who understood its true value would have taken such care to make it whole again." Chief Red Thunder dismounted and walked closer to the porch, still holding the arrow. Up close, Sarah could see the intelligence in his eyes, the careful way he was evaluating every nuance of her behavior. "Tell me, white woman, when you repaired this arrow, did you know what it meant to my son, to my family?" "No," Sarah admitted. "I only knew that it was important to him, that it was beautiful and broken, and that I had the skill to fix it." Red Thunder studied the arrow again, running his fingers over the sinew bindings. "In our tradition, when something sacred is broken and then repaired by another's hand, it becomes more powerful than before. The repair itself becomes part of the medicine, part of the story." He looked up at her. "You have written yourself into the story of my family's arrow, Sarah McKenna. Whether you knew it or not, you have bound yourself to us through your act of healing." Sarah wasn't sure if that was good or bad. "What does that mean?" "It means," Mahpiya said quietly, "that my father sees your repair of the arrow as a sign from the spirits, a symbol that what is broken between our peoples might also be mended." Chief Red Thunder nodded slowly. "My son speaks truly. For many moons, I have been preparing for war against the white settlers. I have been gathering the tribes, speaking of the need to drive the invaders from our sacred lands before they destroy everything we hold dear." He paused, his gaze moving between Sarah and Mahpiya. "But perhaps the spirits are telling me that there is another path, a path that leads not to more death but to understanding." The hostile warrior spoke up again, his voice urgent and angry. Chief Red Thunder listened, then responded in a tone that brooked no argument. The younger man fell silent, but his expression remained thunderous. "My nephew reminds me that one white woman's kindness does not erase the crimes of her people," Red Thunder said. "He is not wrong. The soldiers still come, the buffalo still disappear, the sacred places are still desecrated." "You're right," Sarah said. "One woman can't undo all of that, but maybe she can be the beginning of something different. Maybe love between two people can be the first step toward peace between two peoples." "Pretty words," Red Thunder said, But words are cheap. Actions have meaning. He stepped closer, close enough that Sarah could see the war scars on his weathered hands, the deep lines that spoke of a lifetime of difficult decisions. If you truly love my son, if you truly believe that understanding is possible between our peoples, then prove it. Come with us. Leave your white world behind and join our people. Learn our ways, share our struggles. Show us that your love is stronger than your fear. Sarah's heart pounded. This was the moment she'd been dreading and hoping for in equal measure, the point of no return. And if I do, if I come with you and try to build a bridge between our worlds, then you will be under my protection. You will be welcomed as my son's chosen woman, as a member of our tribe. And perhaps in time others will see what I am beginning to see, that the color of a person's skin matters less than the courage in their heart. Chief Red Thunder held out his hand to her. But understand this, Sarah McKenna. If you take my hand, there is no going back. You will be choosing a life of hardship and uncertainty. You will be choosing love over safety, hope over fear. Are you prepared to make that choice? Sarah looked at the outstretched hand, then at Mahpiya's face. She saw love there and hope, and a future that was uncertain but full of possibility. Then she looked around at her cabin, at the life she'd built with Thomas, at everything familiar and safe that she would be leaving behind. It should have been an impossible choice, but as she thought about the empty months since Thomas's death, about the loneliness and despair that had consumed her, she realized it wasn't really a choice at all. She had been merely surviving. With Mahpiya, she could truly live. Sarah stepped forward and took Chief Red Thunder's hand. "I'm prepared." The chief smiled then, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him. "Then welcome to the family, daughter." He turned to address his warriors in Lakota, his voice carrying the authority of absolute command. Sarah caught enough of their responses to understand that not all of them were pleased with this development, but none would openly challenge their chief's decision. "What happens now?" Sarah asked. "Now we take you home," Mahpiya said, moving to stand beside her. "To our people, our lands. We'll face whatever comes together." As the warriors began to disperse, preparing for the journey ahead, Chief Red Thunder approached Sarah one more time. "The path you have chosen will not be easy," he said quietly. "There will be those among my people who will never fully accept you, just as there will be whites who will call you traitor. Are you certain you can bear such burdens?" Sarah thought of the broken arrow, of how the repair lines had made it stronger rather than weaker. "I think sometimes the most beautiful things are the ones that have been broken and mended. They carry their scars proudly as proof of what they've survived." Red Thunder nodded approvingly. Spoken like a true daughter of the Lakota. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Sarah gathered a few precious belongings: her mother's Bible, Thomas's wedding ring, and the small pouch where she kept her sewing supplies. Everything else she left behind, along with the woman she had been. When she emerged from the cabin for the last time, Mahpiya was waiting with a gentle mare, already saddled for her comfort. "Ready, Tanyetu Winyan?" he asked, using the name that had come to mean more to her than her birth name. Sarah looked one last time at the cabin where she'd nursed her grief, where she'd found love in the most unexpected place, where she'd learned that sometimes the greatest courage comes from choosing the unknown over the familiar. "Ready," she said, and meant it. As they rode away together into the gathering darkness, 20 warriors surrounding them in a protective circle, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Hope, not just for herself and Mahpiya, but for the possibility that love really could bridge the gap between two worlds determined to remain at war. Behind them, the cabin grew smaller and smaller until it disappeared entirely. Ahead lay uncertainty, challenges, and a future that would demand everything she had to give. But beside her rode the man who had shown her that broken things could be made whole again, that love could flourish in the most unlikely soil, and that sometimes the greatest adventures began with the simple act of choosing compassion over fear. The arrow had been broken and mended. Now it was time to see if the same miracle could work for two peoples who had forgotten how to trust. In the distance, a wolf howled, not in mourning, but in welcome. And Sarah McKenna, now and forever the white woman who had mended a broken arrow and found her heart in the process, rode toward her new life with love as her guide and hope as her companion. The circle was complete. The story had found its ending. And somewhere in the vast Montana wilderness, the first fragile threads of understanding began to weave themselves into what might one day become lasting peace.